Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you want more videos every Monday through Friday at 9 p.m. It really helps the channel out. Thanks. My folks were in Toronto for the weekend, so my girlfriend and I had the house to ourselves. The day was lovely up until I left her off at her house later on. At around 8 o'clock, I dropped off my girlfriend at her place and returned home to unwind before spending the evening in the basement watching movies with Charlie, my brother's dog. He enjoys the company since he is an anxious little cretin. As soon as I walked through the door, Charlie, as I had expected, wanted to go outside. Like always, he was all over himself, bouncing to his feet and barking. I opened the back door and let him out into the icy snow that coated our backyard, then waited 5 minutes for him to surely come in since he was cold. Perhaps my impatience was warranted, or perhaps he was just taking his sweet time. After all, I wasn't keeping track of time. However, after waiting for a time, I went ahead and opened the door and greeted him. Normally, he would have came dashing over immediately, so I expected the same this time. But he didn't this time. I hung out at the door for a while, scanning the area for him. Yes, he was outside, lurking around the corner of the shed in our backyard and peering at the house. Even when I shouted out to him, he remained still. He did nothing but stare at me from where he stood on the frozen snow in the moonlight. Since I assumed he didn't want to come inside, I left him outside for a while longer. While my mother was making cherry cobbler, I sneaked a piece and played around on my phone. I figured Charlie would want to come in eventually, so I went out to the living room to watch some TV. I had just settled in to watch a rerun of The Simpsons when I thought I heard a scratch at the door. Instinctively, I got up to let the obnoxious lout inside. But when I checked again, he was still sitting there near the shed. The brightness of the light was reflected in his eyes. Yes, it did give me the creeps a little bit. I went ahead and opened the door, stepping outside in the hopes that he would hear me and run over. He stood very motionless. To be honest, it wasn't until then that I realized something was odd with his appearance. Only his head and eyes were visible to me, in front of what I took to be his body, yet, upon closer inspection, it seemed that his body was lying on its side, while his head remained completely erect. Do you think that was merely a distorted pose? I'd seen dogs do that before, but never on a sheet of ice like that. I stepped down from the porch and saw something. The space in between his head and body looked like ice to me. No frozen chunk, I could see the ice stacking up behind him. It was a brief lapse of time before the truth hit me. The two parts of Charlie's body had been separated. His limp body was by the shed, and what appeared to be a branch wounded his head. While I hadn't been able to tell it apart from his black coat from the porch, I was able to do it now. I backed away, swore, and aimed for the home, where I felt more secure. It wasn't until then that I saw it. In anticipation of winter, we dismantled the gazebo on the porch, leaving only the metal framework, which is now coated in ice from the recent freezing rain. Its unblinking eyes reflected what little light there was, and I could now see the flimsy metal giving way beneath the strain of the monster standing tensely on top. This was no ordinary beast. It rushed at me so quickly that I didn't have time to figure out what the hell it was. I tried to run, but I skidded backwards onto the ice, and that object landed not even a few feet away from me. I decided not to waste my time on it. I ran as fast as I could for the door, fully expecting to lose my balance at any moment. Who knows, maybe the thing didn't either. Something shrieked behind me, sounding like a human voice but being somehow off. It stung my ears to listen to how pained and jumbled it was. As soon as I was safely inside, I slammed the door behind me, locked it, and stood there glaring at my assailant. Almost 8 feet in height, it stood with long, skinny arms and huge eyes that didn't appear to blink. Gray skin that clung closely to its body was a defining feature. With each inhale, I could make out individual ribs. Its hands were covered with dried blood, and each of its long, bony fingers ended in a long, vile nail. I could have sworn I saw a grin on its face as it peered at me through the pane of glass. At first, I thought it was going to try to break in. Because, after all, it wasn't too difficult to shatter the glass. In fact, I did it once when I was locked out. The beast swung around, got down on all fours, and loped over to where Charlie had fallen. I saw it grasp the body, turn around, and start dragging it towards the exit, leaving a trail of blood behind it. The monster was eager for me to observe as it ripped Charlie to shreds and gorged itself on his flesh. As it worked, it turned to me, and I gazed in silent fear. Not even when I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 did it seem to care. "There's a violent animal outside," I warned the operator. I made up a story about a bear, even though I was certain it was unlike anything I had ever seen before. The monster kept its eyes on me the whole while I was on the phone. Nothing I did seemed to register in its mind as intentional. At least that worked out in my favor. Additionally, it didn't appear to consider the possibility of merely shattering the window. I tried not to look at what it was doing to Charlie, but I also couldn't keep my eyes off of it. Staying on the line was requested by the emergency personnel. Personally, I had no problem with that. I waited, feeling terrible, while holding a bizarre gazing contest with the creature. What I had suspected all along turned out to be true. It didn't blink an eye once. I heard the horrific ripping sounds of its long, uneven, hungry fangs as I watched it rip through the flesh of my brother's dog. Time seemed to stand still as we just looked at each other for what seemed like an eternity. It wasn't long before I heard the sound of sirens. I didn't check the time because I didn't want to know how much time had passed. I couldn't take my eyes off of it for fear of missing something important. A moment later, it sprang up onto the roof as the sound of approaching sirens caught its attention. Its claws raked the shingles as I followed it to the front of the house, where I saw emergency vehicles approaching in red and blue. By that time, neither the creature nor the roof noises had returned. One of the police officers came up my walkway, followed by his companion, and then took off towards the back gate. My door was being approached by the lead police. Before he could knock, he saw me standing in the doorway. I ajar it a little bit. A person can exclaim, "It's up there." I let out a yell of horror, unable to contain the shaking in my voice. The officer's partner's choked scream echoed alongside the horrible screaming of the creature before he could respond. Fuming, I slammed my door once more as I watched the police officer draw his pistol and go out the back entrance. When he didn't return, I closed the door and peered out the windows to see where he went. I kept a tight eye on him as he snuck around the side of my house, carrying a flashlight and a revolver. Only when his light hit it did I get a glimpse of it. It screamed as if it were being burned and leapt aside, exposing the second officer's mutilated body. The bone was white, and the red was a jumbled mass that I couldn't make out. The creature's existence on my roof was first revealed by a telltale thud. The last officer turned around, crunching his boots into the snow in an attempt to pursue the animal. He aimed the rifle towards something but didn't shoot. Moments later, the sound of scratching on the roof, distant from where the cop and I were standing, stopped. When I turned around, the police officer was stumbling back towards his car, attempting to figure out where he had come from. Perhaps he was trying to get some help. He gave me a brief glance through the glass before bursting into a stumbling sprint. The thing on my roof was stalking him, as evidenced by the scratching on my ceiling. Back toward the front of the house I accompanied him, rushing from window to window in an effort to gain a closer look. As though by keeping his distance from the building he could avoid the creature's anger, he walked around the perimeter. When we got to his car, he opened the driver's side door, but then he stopped, raised his revolver, and fired 2 bullets into the night. There was no way for me to tell if he was successful. The sound of claws scraping along my roof was all I could hear as the thing fled. The cop promptly locked himself in his vehicle, and the game of cat and mouse restarted. By the time reinforcements and emergency personnel arrived, the creature was long gone. The police officer who took my statement also removed Charlie's remains in a bag. The police were still around, so I quickly drove to a nearby motel and checked in for the night. As for what else that gadget was up to, I have no idea. The police, in my opinion, are also in the dark about this. And things seem to have calmed down overall following the incident. Though I think I can make out the sound of nails on a wooden floor just outside my door if I listen closely enough.